Hello and welcome. My name is Nicholas Hall, founder and president of Graham's Foundation, and I'm your host for today's healthcare industry chat with Alex Newton, co-founder and CEO of Navi Medical Technologies. I founded Graham's Foundation in 2009 in memory of my son, who died as a result of his premature birth. And our mission is to inform and guide parents so that they may confidently navigate the journey of prematurity. And we provide our support through our care package program, our Preemie parent mentor program, our My Preemie mobile app, and our vibrant online community. So with that, I want to welcome Alex Newton, CEO and co-founder of Navi Medical Technologies.
Hi, Nick. Thanks very much.
Absolutely. Hi, Alex. Good to chat with you today. And so you're I think by your accent, you're giving away that you're not from the United States originally.
Yeah, that's right. We're based in Melbourne in Australia, so probably the geographic opposite side of the planet.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, absolutely. And so I just want to spend a few minutes to kind of talk about your background, because your background is not it's not actually medical devices necessarily, or certainly not products in the neonatal intensive care unit. So I'd love to kind of learn more about your personal background.
Yeah, so I started my career as an aerospace engineer. I studied in Australia. I started my career working here in Melbourne. I actually was fortunate enough to work quite a bit in the US. Okay. Worked with some fantastic engineering teams, some of the best engineering teams, I think, at the time in the world. And at a certain point, I sort of started to think a little bit about what is it that really interests me about this job. And it was working with great people on projects that I felt really passionate about. And when I had realized that, it kind of opened up the possibilities to work on things outside of aerospace. And I wanted to get a little bit of experience in other areas. So I studied an MBA at a university here in Melbourne, and was very fortunate that at the final year of my studies, there was a program called Biodesign Innovation that was delivered for the first time in Australia. It was the first time. It was modeled off a program delivered in Stanford University from the US.
Yeah, I was wondering if it was Stanford, because I used to live in California, and I'm aware of some devices, innovation that have come out of that program that I believe have been.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So look, it's a fabulous program, and it brings together people who are studying business, people who are studying engineering, and usually there's a clinician that comes into the team as well. So, exactly. So we had some MBAs, some Master of Biomedical Engineering, soon to be graduates, and we partnered with the neonatologists, and that was kind of the start of the journey. So we spent almost a whole year talking to people in the neonatal intensive care unit about some of the challenges that they have, in their day-to-day work, doctors, nurses, even some of the executive in the hospital. We identified an unmet need, and then we sort of spent some time coming up with how could we solve this from an engineering point of view, but how could we also bring this innovation to market? What sort of business would this have to look like to actually successfully bring this thing to market? At the end of that year, we'd probably thought that we had everything sorted out. One thing that we if I could go back and tell myself, it's a lot longer pathway than just 1 year to get a product to market. So we've been working on that since 2017, and now we're in this good position of having we're still a pre-revenue company, but we've got a wonderful team working on a project that could potentially help thousands or potentially millions of babies around the world.
So I'm curious, and we're going to obviously dive in and talk about the product itself, but I am curious, with the program, were there different areas of potential, I guess, needs where you could sort of sign up, if you will, to say, yeah, I want to look at pediatrics, or I want to look at, were there sort of a menu of different areas?
There were some clinicians who were interested, who maybe had some ideas and wanted a team to help work with it. So there was a range. There were half a dozen clinicians who kind of put their hand up and said, "Hey, this sounds like a great program." It was interesting that so the student team, we had 3 MBA students and two engineering students. We got together and we talked about what areas do we want to work in, and one of the acceptance criteria was that we wanted to work in an area where we could have a big impact. And impact was really important to us. And so we actually, we tried a couple of areas, and then we thought about, what about pediatrics? And that kind of ticked all of the boxes. And we thought, if we could have a small impact on somebody's life on day one over 70 to 80 years, that grows into a huge amount of value or impact that you can actually deliver to that person. And then we met Christiane, who is our neonatologist. And, it was kind of a perfect fit because she's a very experienced neonatologist. She's got 30 years of experience, 20 plus of those years was in the US. So she knows the US system really well. But she's got the brain of an engineer. And so, she was able to translate very easily between what's the clinical need and what's the engineering requirements, I suppose. It was just, again, very fortunate just to have the right people in the right location at the right time.
Yeah, that's amazing. So with, could you maybe share, and by the way, it says dad to 2 kids. I think I hear
You can probably hear them in the background, yeah.
Right? Yeah. Okay, good. Proof statement there. Awesome. So when you did that year, was the program complete, and then it was a decision of whether or not to continue to, because you go to the MBA program, I think probably, I suppose a lot of you're going to this graduate type and you're thinking, I'm going to graduate and then I'm going to go and get a job, or I'm going to go and you mentioned that, Navi, it's 5 years later, it's still pre-revenue. So yeah. I think so let's do this. Let's actually share. I think we can go on to the next slide. I think what we'd like to do is, one, let's actually, for those as the Preemie parent community, they're going to understand what your product is, what you're working on, what you're developing. But let's make sure that we get that clarified so they understand. And then also maybe if you could share about what were some of kind of how the idea came, sort of how it developed and germinated over the course of that year. That'd be really interesting.
Yeah, of course. So the product that we're working on is called the NeoNav ECG tip location system. That's a huge mouthful, but one of the most common procedures that's performed in the neonatal and pediatric ICU setting is the insertion of something called a central line. And there's lots of different categories or types of central line, but at its core, it's a really thin tube that gets inserted into a vein. And the reason it's called a central line is because the tip of that catheter has to be placed close to the heart. And the reason for that is the medications, therapies, nutrients that get delivered, we want that to be picked up and pumped around the body as quickly as possible. So that's why it's got to be close to the heart. Under the current standard of care, doctors estimate the length of that catheter based on the birth weight, if it's a newborn baby, or sometimes just measuring the sort of anatomical distance with a tape measure. They'll then gain access to the vein, insert the catheter up to that predetermined length, and then they'll call for an X-ray. And the X-ray sometimes takes a little while. Sometimes it's pretty quick. But 40% of the time, roughly, the catheter is just not quite in the right spot. And sometimes it's just a little manipulation to get it in the right spot. Sometimes they actually have to take it out and try the procedure all over again. So there's a bit of frustration from the clinician's perspective. The compounding challenge to this, and this was something that we really only learned kind of 12 months into the process, was there's this phenomenon called catheter migration. Particularly in small patients, the catheter is very flexible. And what that means is, even when you get the catheter in the right location initially, over time, that catheter can kind of wiggle its way into the wrong spot. And the wrong spot could be too far into the heart, which poses risks to the patient, or it can be too far from the right location, too low or too high. And this is a very this is a very prevalent issue in newborn babies and in small children. So we kind of thought, well, how should we solve this? So, we went through this fairly well-defined engineering process of coming up with all these different ideas and testing them and figuring out, kind of playing off different concepts, until we arrived at one, which was measuring the electrical activity of the patient's heart through the catheter. And so with it, the beauty of what we're trying to do is that the NeoNav is completely non-invasive. So we're not putting anything new into the patient, which from a patient safety point of view is great, from a regulatory point of view is great. But it's a little adapter that goes on the outside end of the catheter. And when there's a solution that's flushed through there, we can basically turn the catheter into a sensor and measure the electrical activity of the heart. So the rough analogy is it's a little bit like the parking sensor on a car. As you get closer to an object, the signal changes. And as the catheter gets closer to the right location, the electrical signals change. And we've got some software that decodes those signals and provides the feedback to the doctor and nurse in real time. So they know during the insertion procedure, they'll know when they've taken a wrong turn. They'll know when they're getting closer to the right location, and they'll know when they're in the right spot to stop. So then they don't have to call for the x-ray. So that'll save a lot of frustration and time for the doctors and nurses, which is great. But the added benefit is you can use this after the insertion procedure. So on day 2, on day 3, on day 4, you can connect the system back up and reconfirm that the catheter is still in a safe position to use. And that's a great benefit to patients. So that means that patients are getting the best possible care, and that the risk of a complication from a central line is as small as it can be.
I doubt that there's a parent out there like myself that can remember just how nerve-wracking those days were, and oftentimes the doctors and nurses that sort of, maybe it could be, maybe it's the maybe, and the amount of trauma that causes physiologically for the baby, and for us as the parents, I often say we feel the we feel what they're going through.
Yeah, definitely.
And so it begs the question, when you explain the issue, it seems like a no-brainer that it's an area where that finding a better solution makes a whole heck of a lot of sense. So I'm curious, was that actually presented that specifically as one of the challenges, that it is the central line and the way that it's delivered and the way that it's was that one of the specific issues? And it's so I guess I'm curious, because again, it seems like a no-brainer, but I also start to talk about it's 5 years later, and so it's, like you said, it's not something that you can solve for overnight. So I would be kind of curious, maybe some of the different things you tried, or that the evolution of that developing of the product itself.
Yeah, so the problem itself initially came from Christiane's experience. So she's a very experienced senior neonatologist, and sometimes even she finds these central line procedures really frustrating. And so one thing that we wanted to look out for when we were doing this biodesign course was, what are the points in somebody's day where there's a frustration, and that could be an interesting thing to kind of focus in on, and later on go back and ask somebody, hey, what happened there? One of the challenges in the medical environment is people are just used to doing things the current way, and so sometimes they get so used to doing things the current way that it's difficult for doctors and nurses to see that there's an opportunity to improve. And it's only when outside people kind of come in and say, what happened there? Oh, the line was misplaced. Does that happen frequently? Yeah, it happens all the time. Is it annoying? And that kind of thing. Yeah, actually, it is annoying, but we're just so used to it that we just manage it.
Right.
And so we're really good at managing the situation rather than innovating around it. And the reason for that is they're so busy, right?
Yeah.
Like, a lot of doctors and nurses just don't have time to sit down and think about the root cause and how could we change the procedure or the equipment. So I think that was definitely one of the interesting parts in the biodesign course, was actually, almost playing back the day of a nurse or a doctor from our perspective. And doctors and nurses would sometimes think, oh yeah, that is a bit of an issue. If you could help us fix that, that'd be great. So we actually identified a range of unmet or potential unmet needs. This was the one that we selected to go for.
Yeah.
Primarily because it was kind of a passion point for Christiane.
You read my mind. My mind. I was going to say, so did it come down to 3 or 4? Was there sort of were there some other ones that, that were up for consideration? Because I'm sure there's not a shortage when you look at it. There's probably
there are a range of unmet needs. One of the challenges I thought coming into this program was, my wife's a doctor, and I thought doctors and nurses are really smart people. They will have solved all the problems. How are we going to find a problem to solve? That wasn't the hard part. The hard part was figuring out which problem to solve. So, we went through a process of trying to understand, well, okay, we've got, a dozen different problems that we might want to look into. How do we choose which one fits with our team's capabilities, which one has a good opportunity in front of it? Because one of the challenges you mentioned before, this seems like an obvious problem to solve. Why hasn't it been solved? There's a lot of evidence published out there that there are challenges with central line procedures, particularly in newborn patients. That's well documented. Yeah. The challenge is this is a small market, and usually it comes down to the commercial side of things, which is, medical device companies, traditional medical device companies, are addressing multi-billion-dollar opportunities. Because it takes the average medical device will take 10 years and about $30 million to bring to market. So it's a huge sink of time and resources. Yep. And so from a commercial perspective, I understand that medical device companies want to be solving a range of problems, not just the profitable ones. But at the end of the day, they're a commercial enterprise, they're a business. And so they have to make sure that what they're focusing on has the potential to be profitable. That's one of the challenges in the NICU and pediatric market, is it's a small market. So you actually have to think about how do we configure a company slightly differently so that we can address these smaller opportunities. Doesn't mean that they're not important. They're very important. Yeah. But just from an economic point of view, they might not have the payoffs that can entice the big companies. So that's what we've tried to do over the last few years, is really think about how do we turn our company into a company that can not just address this challenge, but other challenges in the neonatal intensive care unit. Because if we can bring together a couple, then maybe there's an opportunity to actually have quite a healthy
flywheel. Yeah,
exactly, the flywheel effect. So often when I'm telling people about who we are and what we're doing, I try to tell people that we're not just building a product, we're building a company. And I usually tend to try to differentiate Navi, which is our company, and the product, which is the neonav. So that's one of the challenges in the NICU space. I mean, there's a whole list, but it's a big one.
Having lived in Silicon Valley myself, back during .com 1.0, which ages me, I know the challenge of trying to take from an idea, a concept that we all love our ideas. We think this is a no-brainer, and then you start to actually put it out there, and even again, you're sharing. It's a compelling solution, but what were some of the challenges maybe that were surprising to you? Because to some extent, it's a startup. There are going to be challenges. you know, it's a small market. I mean, there are some of those things you probably were aware of.
Mm-hmm.
Not sure how wide open your eyes were, but you probably had a sense of. But I'm just kind of curious, maybe what's some of the challenges that surprised you, but also some of the maybe the solutions. You know, maybe some of the some of the solutions to those challenges that maybe surprised you as well.
Oh, there's so many. One of the things that I found interesting was, you know, we're a team of first-time founders, so none of us have been through this process before. We've got some people with industry experience, but it's usually in other industries, and so we're going through the process of learning how to develop, you know, do clinical research, product development, and commercialization activities. We're learning that on the journey. But actually, I'm surprised how I'm surprised how well we're doing it. You know, actually, like the team that we've built is so good at approaching obstacles that they have never had to get over before, and thinking, okay, this is just another bump in the road in a long journey. How are we going to get around this? And so I think the resilience of people is something that surprised me. And, you know, I think that, you know, the importance of forming the right team at the start can't be overemphasized, because at the start, you don't really have a product. You don't have something tangible, but what you've got is the value of the people that you've collected at the start. And so, you know, I think that surprised me, because I think the natural view of something is, well, if you've got a great idea, you can go out and raise tons of money, and then you can just hire people to do the jobs.
Yeah.
But it doesn't quite work like that in our space,
Right.
because, you know, it just is slightly configured differently. You know, there were other challenges that we had to get past. You know, we were trying to do clinical studies at the hospital that we've partnered with, the Royal Women's Hospital here in Melbourne, has a fantastic neonatal intensive care unit. They've been amazingly supportive of the work that we've been doing. Couldn't ask for a better partner. But trying to do clinical research during the COVID pandemic was so difficult. It was just so difficult, and constantly having to sort of reevaluate your plans. And so, you know, one of the challenging things at the start of this journey was, if somebody could just tell me how long it's going to take and how much money I need to raise, that would have made my life 5 times easier. But there's so many unknowns, and they're all sort of multifactorial, that it was just really, it took a long time for us actually to just put a plan on a page. We had to iterate so many times in discussions with product development, you know, regulatory experts, clinical experts, commercialization experts. We just had to keep iterating so many times until, you know, essentially you kind of come up with a strategy, you go and talk to people, and they'll shoot it down. And then you change it, and then you just keep going through that process until eventually people stop tearing it to shreds, and you think, okay, maybe we're
onto something.
That's, and then you start to execute that plan, and as soon as you start to execute that plan, things change, and you have to replan. And then, you know, COVID comes along and just completely changes the situation. So you know, another piece of learning that I've taken away from this process is the importance of having a plan, but being flexible and being adaptable to that change. Because, you know, in my previous life as an aerospace engineer, we would have a plan of how the project would go, and there wasn't really much deviation from that. It might take slightly longer or cost a little bit more, but there wasn't really a big change. But in the startup world, you have to be very nimble and flexible. So, you know, that was another key piece of learning, I think.
Yeah, makes sense. How is the funding different for with a medical device? Again, I'm thinking traditional startup, friends and family, then maybe a more mature, what we call an angel, which would be a high net worth individual. Then if that succeeds, then, you know, traditional venture capital, and, you know, and then they have the, you know, different venture capitalists that invest based on the maturity of the company. But I would think with a medical device that there's probably more alternatives, or perhaps even with one that's pediatric focused. Maybe maybe there are different channels that you mentioned a lot of organizations as partners on your website, and they mostly look like governmental or those types of organizations. I suspect they probably have perhaps provided. I don't know. So that was one of my questions: is how have those partner organizations kind of supported you during your development process?
The funding question for medical devices in Australia, but also in the US, the funding question for medical devices is always a challenge. I think it's even harder when you're in the pediatric space. And the reason for that is, investors typically have a range of opportunities that they can look at. With a medical device, you have a long development time frame. There's a huge regulatory risk that you've got to meet at the end of that time frame, and then you can start generating money. And so, that when investors are looking at an opportunity, often they're looking at two things. They're looking at how much am I going to get back, and how long is it going to take before I get that money back. With a medical device, often you're looking at a large market, so that multiple is there, but the long time frames are associated with that. And so it can make it a little bit challenging. When you're in the pediatric market, it's still a long time frame. Often the regulatory hurdles are slightly higher, or perceived slightly higher, but the market size is also smaller. And so it makes it even more difficult. The technical term would be the IRR, internal rate of return, would be lower for a pediatric or neonatal startup. So in our case, at the start of our journey, there were a small group of people who believed in our team and supported the team, and that's what people invested in.
Yeah.
Over time, as our funding needs have grown, it's difficult for those early stage investors. You talked about the Friends Falls family. It's difficult for those stage of investors to continue to support the company because the funding requirements grow. And so we look to government grants wherever we can. There's some federal and state government grants in Australia that have been very supportive of our work, because I think what they're trying to achieve through those grant programs is development of capability and impact. And I think that's where the pediatric medical device has a strong story to tell in that space.
Yeah.
But also there's some grant funding from the US that we were able to tap into through the FDA's Pediatric Device Consortia, which is a fantastic program. We've joined 4 of those Pediatric Device Consortia partner sites, and it's been wonderfully helpful. And that has come with some funding. I think probably the relationships that we've built through that program have been more valuable than the funding, but that's not to say that the funding's not valuable.
Yeah.
So we're probably at the point now where we are looking for institutional investors, and it's it's about how do you tell the story. We're really trying to tell the story that, hey, back this team because we're solving a really important problem for a super important patient population. But this is just the start. We've got ambitions to do multiple products and actually build a company that's a real specialist in neonatal and pediatric medical devices. So, I hope we'll see, but I hope that message sticks.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit? I learned that you received a breakthrough device designation from the FDA at the end of 2022, and I'm curious if you could share what exactly that means, and has that provided any particular unique opportunity as a result of what that was, what that took to receive that?
Yeah, so the breakthrough device designation is a wonderful initiative that the FDA put together to kind of fast track the regulatory process for devices that are solving problems that are important problems to solve where there currently isn't a solution on the market. And so we basically approached the FDA. And just as a side point, the great thing about working with the FDA is you can have these things called pre-submission meetings. So before you submit your huge regulatory dossier to the FDA to say, please, can we sell our product, you've got the opportunity to meet with them to refine your understanding of the strategy, which is hugely helpful. Yeah. And not always available in other markets. So during one of those pre-submission meetings, we talked to the FDA and said, could we file for this breakthrough device designation for the placement of to assist with the placement of umbilical catheters? Because really, there's really no technology out there that can help place central catheters below the heart. Basically, there's two ways that the catheter can be placed. It can be placed top down or bottom up towards the heart. And there's really nothing out there to help with the bottom up placement. And we put together a rationale. We had some discussions with the FDA, and they accepted that submission. And they said, yeah, for the placement of umbilical catheters, we'll give you that breakthrough device designation. So what that means is that we get access to the FDA on a more frequent basis. So we can enter into basically monthly sprints with the FDA. Yeah. And that's hugely helpful for, particularly for a startup company that's trying to refine the regulatory strategy. So instead of having maybe one or possibly two opportunities per year to talk to the FDA and really iterate through the strategy, we can do it on a monthly basis. So it really is, from my perspective, it's really working in partnership with the FDA to make sure that we get everything right, all of our ducks in a row, before we actually go and spend a lot of money on that large validation study and then get market entry. So, I think it's a fantastic initiative by the FDA. So credit to them for doing this sort of thing, and it's going to be hugely helpful for us. And it means that we can say that our device is a breakthrough device, which sounds cool.
Yeah. No, I mean, it sounds cool. And when you understand what is required, and I'm thinking from an investor perspective, it's, you're not it's being recognized as something unique, differentiated. What I learned being a parent in the NICU for, several months with my daughter, I discovered how many products are off-label or are, they are originally designed for adult size humans, and they've come up with ways to try and quote make it work for these little neonates and 1 and 2 pound babies. And so and I understand, as I have learned and better understood the challenges, from an innovation, from funding, from development, it requires an incredible amount of determination and courage, which is one of the core values that you share about, on your website: growth mindset, determination and courage, empathy, trust and integrity, all, incredibly important values, not only for this product, but for obviously for the company itself as you're going forward. I am curious, the founders, I'm guessing, and just a couple more questions before we wrap up, but I'm guessing the founders are all based in Australia. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And so how are you managing, I'm pretty sure the FDA is based here in the US. I'm curious kind of how you're managing that relationship.
Well, I mean, one of the good things to come out of the pandemic was kind of the ubiquity of Zoom meetings. And so it's actually become a lot easier now to just jump on a Zoom call with people. I think prior to the pandemic, there was an expectation that, a lot of companies from Australia would actually fly over to have meetings with the FDA and then fly back. But I think these days it's a lot easier just to schedule a call. Sometimes it can be at odd hours. When you're trying to talk to the FDA, if they say we're available at midday or whatever, you kind of think, oh, okay, that's 2 a.m. here or something. But that's okay because it's an important call. It beats jumping on a plane. I just wanted to go back to something that you mentioned before, which was, as a parent in the NICU, you were looking at these off-label devices being used, and that I think that's such an important point. Something that I'm sure everyone at Graham's Foundation will have heard before is that kind of mantra that people say that kids aren't just small adults, and it's like you hear that everywhere in children's hospitals, in neonatal intensive care units, and I think that's the reason why the FDA created the Pediatric Device Consortia, was they were looking at the data coming through from the registrations of new technologies. And I think it was about 15% of new technologies coming through was seeking a pediatric indication for use. So 15% isn't a lot, but when you dive into that number, you realize that actually, the way that FDA defines pediatrics is from day one through to, I think it's 21 years old. And so a lot of those products that were seeking a pediatric indication for use were really targeting that upper age range. And so it was only a fraction that was really addressing the sort of younger age ranges, neonates, infants, and toddlers, children. And so, I think it's just so important for companies to address that. And I think it's important for people to advocate for the right product for the right patient. So, I think the work that Graham's Foundation is doing is wonderful. The sort of advocacy at that parent level for, I want a product that's suitable for the patient. I think it's going to take everybody to really kind of change that thinking, but I think it'll happen.
Yeah, and I recognize the challenge that a 1.5 pound baby, you could argue a fetus that's alive, and is being kept alive in the neonatal intensive care unit, comparing that to a 7 pound baby, that's completely, even that is completely different, right? And so whereas we adults, we don't change that much from age 30 to age 40 to age 50,
That's such a good point. Yeah, such a good point. Yeah. When we've been talking to, the regulators around the world, some of the feedback is, you say, look, we're developing a product for neonatal patients, and they say, cool, which ones? It's like, because it's such a spectrum, exactly like you said, you can have a 500 gram, very premature, 28, 20, 26, 27, 28 week patient, all the way up to a 4 or 5 kilogram, more or less term patient. So just within that neonatal population, there's a huge spectrum about what patients look like. But then, within pediatrics, it's really, you're looking at patients from 500 grams up to 50 kilograms. So that's a huge range. Yeah.
And I often say, we parents, we're grateful for the work that the doctors and nurses do in the early, hours, days, and months of our baby's life. We're grateful that survival rates are even, they're significantly better than when my twins were born, now 16 years ago. So and we also recognize that our babies do not come through that journey unscathed.
Yeah.
And so everything that can be done to make a difference in the care that baby receives, to your point, the goal is for that baby to have a long, fruitful life. And so it can and does have a profound impact for an incredibly, for lifetimes. And so we're just, again, it's the yin and the yang. We're grateful, and we as parents, we know that we can, if we're going to do it, let's continue to push to do better, to do our best to do better. And fortunately, we have organizations and companies like yours that get into an MBA program and are open to the possibility and get inspired by the opportunity to really make a difference. So again, we parents, hopefully it's just one day that this new solution is there, and it's just like overnight it creates this new breakthrough, a whole new way for the clinicians to deliver what they're already delivering, but in a whole new way that has a profound positive impact on our babies. So
Yeah,
before,
I
yeah,
really hope that, I think from my perspective, it would be great if our device was kind of completely invisible to the
yeah,
parents. Like
right,
like if it just wasn't even something that parents thought about,
yeah,
that would be a great outcome from my
yeah.
perspective.
That's great. Alex, before we wrap up, is there anything else that you'd want to? I know we were able to cover a lot of territory, but there's also
Mm.
obviously what you guys are doing is complex. And so, just anything else that you want to share with our
Yeah,
parents?
maybe just one other point, which is working in the pediatric and neonatal space. The thing I think that is different about working in potentially the adult market is the level of collaboration and the willingness to sort of work together to solve problems. I think that's a really unique aspect, and we've reached out to people all around the world, and I can't think of a single time that somebody has said, no, we won't talk to you, or no, we won't help you with the information that you need. So I think it's a very collaborative, cooperative space to work in. So that's definitely something that's in our favor.
Yeah,
I think that doctors and nurses that work with kids around the world have dealt with the challenges of not having just the right product for so long that when there are people that are looking to innovate in this space, they just sort of jump in and say, yes, help us out, please. And so I think that's great. The work that groups like Graham's Foundation do is so important as well, and it helps us spread that message, which again, it's kind of amplifying that
yeah,
effect of that message. So thank you very much. But at the end of the day, this is an area that we feel passionate about, but it's actually a really nice space to work in.
yeah. No, absolutely. And I'm getting ready. We're getting ready to hit the conference circuit here in the spring here in the U.S. and I'll be sure, and I'll be sharing about the conversation that you and I had today, and yeah, I'm looking forward to your continued progress and development. So
Thanks, Nick.
and
I hope maybe in a couple of years I can be back on and we can say, hey, we did it. We've
yeah,
found this thing here. Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. Well, Alex, thanks again for your time today. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Well, before we wrap up today, I do want to take a moment to thank our longtime partner and supporter, Pampers, for their underwriting of today's healthcare industry chat. And if you want to stay connected with Graham's Foundation on all our different social platforms, you can find us on Facebook, on Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, and on our YouTube channel as well. So thank you once again to Alex, and thanks to Pampers, and thanks to our Preemie parent community for placing your trust in us to provide you with the information and the guidance to help you confidently navigate the journey of prematurity.